fans, Ready Player Will here. Today we're doing part 2 of the Eliza character review. Last time we covered the character overview, the stat analysis, and the report card, which I ended up giving her a B+ on, and this time we're going to go a little more in depth on the class and job analysis, the abilities in particular, which ones I think are valuable, which ones I think are less so, and then an AI/auto prioritization, getting to know how she'll function in Guild War and Arena and other auto-oriented battles that you'll do. Then I'm going to go through the TMR review and look at the value of our TMR, and finally wrap things up with some general thoughts now that we've had an opportunity to really look at the character in depth. So let's kick things off. The class and job overview overall. So her passive abilities I think are fine. I don't think they're anything crazily above average. I think they're ones that you pretty commonly see, but just kind of going through these one by one. The Hunter's Mind's Eye increases range of 2 with missile attack 15. The Trick Lancer lore is a very, very good one, increasing the critical rate by 25% and defense penetration by 40. I think this is a almost must equip on the majority of content you'll put her in for the extra damage output it'll do. The combat ready one is actually a really interesting one. I think that's a little more oriented for PvE than it is for PvP, where it will let her start off the battle with 15 extra AP. Not total, but actual physical AP in hand. So that one's good. I just don't know how valuable it is in the battles that go on as long as they do, where 15 AP in the broad scheme of a battle doesn't make a massive difference unless it's the deciding difference whether or not you kill them or not in 1 turn or 2 turns. That's obviously totally different. Now, Ranger lore is a very, very good one. It does only increase her range by 1, but the accuracy boost of 25 is very material when it comes to potentially hitting evade units. The Unwavering Javelineer is very, very interesting when you have the Trick Lancer equipped on her sub-job. This is actually a very big upgrade to one of those abilities, which we'll see soon. I like this one a lot as well. And then finally, Focus, I'm not a big fan of anymore. She really doesn't have that many abilities that have skill activation time, so I wouldn't worry too much about what this provides in terms of value. Picking and choosing my 2 favorites, again, Trick Lancer lore is a guaranteed for a majority of things. I am partial to Hunter's Mind's Eye here as my second favorite when you're really leaning heavily into that missile setup. The Ranger lore I like during evade metas if you need it, and Unwavering Javelineer I think like a lot, but that one is very X's and O's specific in terms of how you utilize the Trick Lancer sub-job if you are. Now for the counter abilities, she has 2 just magnificent counter abilities here. The first one is Ice Snare, with a decent range of going upwards of 4 squares away. It's a 30% chance to proc, and it decreases, it's a double imperil, decreases ice resistance by 25% and decreases missile resistance by 25%. So overall, really great things to increase her damage output in addition to some ice teammates. The only thing that I'm kind of fair on is the fact that it's only 4 squares away. If you have enemies within 4 squares of her that are attacking and hitting her, that's usually not a good sign to begin with. So although it is a really good ability, I don't like the fact that you have to be as close as you are in order to proc it. For that reason, I genuinely really love Reflex. It's probably the best counter ability in the game. That being said, we've also seen a lot of reduced counter ability mechanics introduced, so this doesn't have as much of a aggravating effect as it used to, but given how squishy she is, the fact that she can just straight up dodge a physical or magical attack, I do think is very valuable. So really some debate whether which one is better. Counter Trick is pretty average, probably not going to use that in the broad scheme of things. Now when we get into the main job here, the Hunter, I'm going to go through the buffs, or buff, singular, first, and then I'm going to go through the attack abilities. And I've mentioned this on the first slide where she does have some AP problems, and I'm going to kind of lean into that. This is one of the reasons why, where she doesn't have access to a lot of buffs, which is a primary way in which a lot of characters gain their AP to start a fight. So this one in particular is only 26 TP, which means in her base form, she'll receive 13 AP when using it, which frankly isn't that much, but it is a very good ability. The agility of 25% and attack of 40%, that's basically a TMR ability that we've seen released as of late in terms of potency. So the fact that she has a TMR level ability on here is a very good ability. It does have a AoE height of 1, meaning you can go to a teammate adjacent that's a square higher than her and use it. It is a really good buff overall. It's just unfortunate that it's her only buff on the main job and for as low TP as it is. Now when we get into the attacks of the Hunter main job, and this is one of the reasons why I gave her an A+ on the report card for her main kit, there are a ton of just fantastic abilities here. We'll go one by one. So Maddening Arrow, lower modifier ability for 15 AP, but does have the chance to Berserk. Again, kind of the debate whether or not you want her at 50 faith, 70 faith, 97 faith. You want to kind of play with those odds to proc that Berserk status effect because it is a very valuable and very potent status effect, especially given that she's not a incredibly hard-hitting DPS compared to many of the others. Given that she's a missile unit, if you can Berserk an enemy and then follow up an attack, she will do significantly more damage. So that's an important one to keep in mind. The Warning Volley is an exceptionally good ability in terms of decreasing the CT, in addition to having a very forgiving and large AoE. I'll get into the heights in just a moment here in terms of what it can hit, but a little costly at 36 AP, particularly when you compare it to how good I think the final ability is here, which we'll get to. Triple Flight is definitely another A+ ability for only 20 AP. It is a triple hit that will also decrease the enemy AP when she performs a critical hit on them. This is, I think, is a really good one in terms of overall survivability for her, where if she can force enemies to low enough levels of AP that they're forced to basic attack instead of using an ability, that obviously is going to reduce the amount of damage she's going to take. So there is some value there overall. The Greater Armor Piercing Arrow is a very good ability here, where it's the decreased defense of 25. Again, another way for her to increase her overall damage output as well as her teammates. But then finally, my favorite ability in this kit, Arrow Storm of Removal, dispels Protect and Shell for targets, plural. It's an AoE ability for 40 AP. Not many characters in the game have access to this kind of dispel, and you normally can't remove Protect and Shell from other kind of dispel abilities. Now, in the modern era of War of the Visions, many of the meta tanks rely on Protect and Shell, whether given externally or as part of their buff, and the fact that she can just remove that is a massive game changer when it comes to taking down the enemy tank very quickly. And then modifier wise, you're looking at, on average 165% for most of these abilities, in addition to what they do for the potential defense break. They might be following up on an imperil. So yeah, absolutely amazing main job here. And if we're looking just a little bit at the range and the heights, so given her ability as a ranger, most of the range heights, meaning how far can you shoot up or down based on the trajectory, because she's a bow user, so she does get that parabolic trajectory when she fires. All of these are range heights of 5, and when it comes to the AoEs, the Warning Volley is a little forgiving in that you can hit enemies that are 1 square higher than another, but the Arrow Storm of Removal is pretty incredible that the AoE range height is 2, meaning you can hit enemies that are 2 squares higher or lower than each other, as long as they're in that cross-shaped AoE. So overall, a lot of flexibility here for the range at which you can hit, particularly when you consider that you can add that range +1 or range +2 for how far horizontally she can hit. So if you're looking at Arrow Storm of Removal here, that AoE extends as far out as 5 squares. That can be as far as 7 squares. So again, really, really far-reaching. And just like a visual representation of what that might be, this is a in-game screenshot of me doing some range testing with her. So if you have Eliza here at a height of 5, and this high ground here in the top right corner is height of 10 that you can barely see, she actually can hit up here with her abilities, given that range height of 5, and you can obviously see how far it extends downward when she's on that high ground. So overall, fantastic range when applied properly. Now for the Hunter subjob, going off just buff and attack, I have it here on the same screen. If you do have her Hunter subjob equipped, there's 1 buff and 1 attack. Now the buff, kind of similar to the first one in that it's a relatively low TP usage, only 22, but it is, on paper, a really good ability in that it increases accuracy by 60 and increases the range of 1. If you might not have already noticed, this is the only ability or a buff that will extend her range further than her passives give her, which is kind of different compared to what you see in many of the other missile-oriented units. A lot of them in their abilities have their own ability to generate an extra range of 1 pretty easily, and based on the AI prioritization, which we'll get to soon, this is not all that reliable, unfortunately. So although it is a good ability, it's a very finicky ability, and overall probably not going to see it used that much. Now, Clean Piercer is a devastatingly strong ability for tank busting people that have a lot of missile resistance. There is a cast time on this one. It's one of the few abilities that she does, but when you consider the 185% modifier, in addition to the extra defense penetration and missile attack resistance penetration it gives her, so if she has 40 on the passive and 50 here, that gets her at 90 defense penetration, not including a Trust Stone passive, so that could easily get to 100% defense penetration, but also the missile attack resistance penetration. She has 20% as part of her mastery ability, which we'll see soon. That when you combine this 50 with the 20, 70% missile resistance penetration, in addition to what you might have on a Trust Stone or a weapon. Effectively, any tank that is gearing themselves for missile damage, this will cleave right through almost all of it. So very, very lethal ability when in the right scenario. So it's good, but I don't think it's the kind of ability you need to rely on having equipped all the time. Now, as we transition into the Trick Lancer, again, the buffs on this class, it's a good one. Attack 40%, but again, this one is kind of similar to the one on her main ability, but this one it's for attack for allies. If we take just a step back here, the buff on the original job here is attack for herself, this 40%, and it's the herself and allies that get the agility buff. This one's just slightly different in that it's attack for herself and everybody. It does have the AoE height of 1, but again, a lot of overlap with that first buff, so you're not getting a lot of variety here so far in what she has to offer. When we get to the offensive abilities of the Trick Lancer, there's some really good ones here. So Trick Thrust, and we'll see the range a little more clearly in a second here. I think it's an interesting enough ability. Again, lower modifier, but it does have some debuffs on it. For an AP cost that's not terribly higher than her cheapest on her main job. This one, though, obviously very limited range from the tiny squiggles you can see for now. So overall, not a great ability for her. Same with Cross Break, same with AP Break Lance. These to me are by far more for PvE content when you can strategically position her and force the enemy AI to do certain things. This range is just unacceptable for her, that if you're going to be within 1 or 2 squares of an enemy, particularly if you're just meeting them, straight on in the battlefield, that's a recipe for disaster for her, so not recommended. But Binding Javelin, my goodness, this is a fantastic ability for her. This is a very, very far range, as we'll see in a second, but it's the 50% chance to immobilize and decrease the healing power by 60 on a target when you hit a critical hit. Again, when you're talking about tanks and certain healing metas, when it comes to Velis and Lemure, Dark Lilith, what she can regenerate for health, this is a very potent amount of healing power for a range that's not much shorter than what her bow skills normally offer. So we saw in many of the range of some of the bow skills, it's upwards of 5 to 7 squares away, and this one is 5 squares away as well. I don't think it benefits from the extra range that passives give. I do need to check that. But regardless, 5 squares away is definitely a nice, happy place for her. And just if you're getting into some of the heights, the amazing additional thing about Binding Javelin is that the height is also 5, like her missile ability. So not only can it hit 5 squares away, but it can hit upwards of 5 or vertical or declining squares above or below you. So to me, if I'm going Trick Lancer on the sub job, this is probably the only ability that I'm equipping on her, and it's also a good one given that it's pierce oriented. Not everyone gets to gear for pierce resistance. Now, as you get to the Ranger sub job, this is a job I would not utilize often. I don't think Sharpshoot is all that valuable anymore, particularly that her accuracy isn't that bad to begin with. And overall, I think the presence of the Ranger job in her kit is really just for the purpose of stats, to give her some of the passives that we've seen and some of the counter abilities that we've seen, but I really don't see a scenario in which this offers anything that her main job doesn't already offer, other than access to some cheaper abilities. So if you really are leaning hard into that missile-oriented profile, there is some strategy here where you only enable 1, maybe 2 abilities on the main job, and then rely on the damage output of this sub-job to do your missile damage for effectively cheaper than what you can get. But the utility of the main job abilities is so good, I don't know many scenarios in which that would apply. Which finally gets us to her Limit Break, and boy oh boy is it a good one. So single cast, not surprising, 43 cost, which is very cheap for how good I think this is. It's a 38% Ice Imperil, while also decreasing the move of the target. And if you're looking at the range of this ability, this can hit up to 6 squares away, not including the passives that you can equip for extra range. So if you have range 2 equipped on the passive, this can hit 8 squares away. That is an immensely far distance to immediately imperil an enemy and reduce their movement and do 200% modifiers worth of damage in addition to that. So this is a stellar Limit Break. It's unfortunate, obviously, that it can only be used once, but this is the kind of thing that will turn the team fight early on. You just have to play around taking advantage and capitalizing upon what it does. But finally, just a last part about her kit, the Mastery ability. She gets the standard HP of 10% and Ice Attack 15 for herself and allies. She does get the Missile Attack Resistance Penetration of 20, as I mentioned earlier, so that's a great extra, damage potential output for her. And the decreased attack skill activation time of 100. I don't want to say immaterial, but very not noticeable. I don't even know why they put it in here. I don't think it changes anything about what you would do with her, or even tangibly in battle, 100 is so much of a drop in the bucket out of 1,000. I don't think it really does much. Sure, maybe in conjunction with the passive equipped, might do something, but there's really not many charge abilities on her kit. I don't know why you would lean into it. Now, as we get into the AI and auto prioritization, this is incredibly important when you get to know a character. So when you have her hunter sub-job equipped, that's her main job, that's the sub-job, the prioritization of her AI will that she will use tracking techniques first above all else. She will move to a teammate to use it, but she will also use it on herself if a teammate is not in range, but she will always prioritize this number one. Now, as far as I can tell, number two is typically the TMR. Now, I don't test every single TMR, but I tested the Isabel's, and I tested her own TMR, and this becomes second to tracking techniques. And I do believe tracking techniques is the kind that she will cast twice if another teammate comes in a range. So if you don't get your pathing proper and have her buff both teammates at once, she might end up using this 2 times in a row before she can get to the TMR. And the third ability as well. So nose for the hunt, which is the hunter sub job here. Again, a potentially good ability, but the odds of actually getting it to work, considering her range, the AI essentially works that she will always move forward if there's not an enemy in range, but once there is, she will stand still and attack. But what that basically means is tracking techniques, she'll move to a teammate or move forward and use it. The TMR, she will move forward after she uses it. And at that point, after 2 turns of movement, she's almost definitely in range of an enemy. So the odds of getting this third one off are very, very low. So good ability, just not very reliable. Now, when you equip the Trick Lancer subjob, slight rearrangement in this. She will still use tracking techniques first and foremost, but second to that, she will prioritize all-out assault, which is the Trick Lancer buff, and then third is the TMR. So you really have to kind of pick and choose here. Which of these two do you want to use if you are relying on a TMR for whatever ability that may be? But the bottom line is she will be using tracking techniques the majority of the time, so just get used to that when you're getting your AI in line, which honestly isn't the worst thing. It's nice that she can move horizontal to a teammate as opposed to some buffs that require them to move forward. Now, speaking of the TMRs, when we look at her TMR in particular, it is a cloth type of equipment. The stats on it are fair. I think it's a little low on the HP for a cloth, only 270 HP. The 10 defense and the 13 crit rate are nice, but that's kind of power crept at this point in my opinion. 10 defense is kind of a drop in the bucket that you can get on many accessories. Crit rate, kind of the same concept, so overall statistically I don't love it. The ability also fair. 18 TP is pretty darn low for an ability that you only get 1 cast out of, and although the effect is relatively good in that every time you perform a critical hit for 3 turns you will get 20 AP back. It's obviously not as much as Isabel's. It's obviously reliant on actually landing a critical hit, so if you don't, the ability is worthless. And to me, this is really more for PvE content, not for Eliza, but for other units where a lot of content you want to find ways to generate AP, and that's the Lucio TMR, the Noctis TMR, the Isabel's. Well, now we have a 4th one that can pretty reliably generate AP. So it's a nice addition to the game, but I don't think it's all that great. You're probably not going to get as much use of it as you might some other AP regenerating TMRs. So now that we've seen the statistical report card and everything in the last video, we've looked a little closer at the abilities here, what her AI does, it's time for my general thoughts overall. So number 1, a utility packed character, and only looking at the main job, she can dispel, protect, and shell, 25 defense break, decrease 20 AP upon a critical hit of a target, decrease CT of 15 to a group of enemies, the 25% chance to berserk, and the limit breaks 38% ice and peril with a decrease of move 1. That's a ton of utility on a main job. Obviously makes up for some of the trade-off that you might get in the damage dealing, and even though the trade-off isn't that massive when you consider that she amplifies her own damage by things like the ice and peril and the defense break, so on and so forth. Now, as I've kind of alluded to, she will struggle with AP management. Her buffs hinder her a little in my opinion, that they're not that expensive, and the abilities overall are rather expensive given what she starts out with and given how quickly she can drain that with her limit break. Despite the fact it's only 43 AP, which is low, that's the majority of her AP. So if she uses that, it's very difficult for her to follow up on additional attacks when she's basically already out of AP. So that'll be in part 3 when I really go through how you can mitigate that weakness a little bit. The third one here, very squishy, will be map dependent, and that's not an Eliza issue, that is a missile unit issue. Many of them, given their range, how low their overall survivability is, very, very map dependent no matter what at the end of the day, no matter how good the character is. I think the Immobilize on the Trick Lancer subjob is very interesting. Now, the X's and O's of why I think that is This is an ability that if you have a character, it can hit up to 5 squares away, right? So if Eliza comes within 5 squares away and can immobilize that person, unless that character has an ability that's 5 squares that can reach Eliza, Eliza essentially is cemented where that person stands, and almost all of her abilities, as you've seen, can still reach that 5 distance. So she'll get in her position, immobilize them, they won't be able to attack her, and when her next follow-up attack happens, she won't move closer to them. She'll stand where she is, but she'll continue attacking. So I like the chess matchup there, at least the theoretical idea of it, that she can get, far enough away from someone, stop them in their tracks where they are, and effectively just keep them out of her range, which is going to keep her alive. Now, I think the lack of, and I miss a misspelling, range +1, not aim +1, range +1 ability will be a hurdle. And think of aimed fire. It's a buff that gives all units a range of +1. Hers is tied to an ability that, as we saw in the AI prioritization, falls relatively far, and you probably won't get to use all that often, which I actually think does obviously hurt her. Now, she's not really hurting for range overall. She's still got some decent range, but not to what you might expect from normal missile units. So unless you get that externally from a different missile user, I do think that's one that you'll have to kind of work around. And then some final general thoughts here. I don't think her value being tied to ice is as bad as one might think. Ice is relatively low in terms of overall element strength in the scheme of the game when you kind of stress test things to their max. But that's for a variety of reasons that aren't unique to ice. Number one, though, they do have some great vision cards overall. Ice really does. And they have one more pending next week, which leans right into Eliza's wheelhouse. We do also have Snow and Agrius X coming, which are two fantastic ice tanks, which really is a missing piece of what Ice has right now. Fryavi is just too unreliable as a tank. Wind as an element is definitely trending higher at the moment now, and as you play with the element wheel, if Wind gets some relative strength, then Ice should as well. And on that note, fire teams are not a huge threat, unfortunately. They're just not. Fire is at the bottom in terms of viability compared to the other elements. So the fact that fire isn't a massive threat to ice means that you can be pretty safe using them. And finally, on that note, I think the missile and pierce jobs of hers feed in nicely into what Ice has already set up. Now, this is not a thumbs up on the viability of these characters, but every element should have some kind of general profile. And oftentimes when you get a character introduced that doesn't fit the profile of the element, the character ends up suffering from it. Again, a great example, this is Valentine Eldyra that just came out as part of the fire element units. She's a evade unit, but fire's not known for invasion. They don't have a luck card. There's a whole bunch of problems with it. But Ice is missile and pierce oriented a little bit already in terms of Barrett, Rosa, and Kinkari for the missile units. Then for pierce oriented units, Aranea, Victoria, and Laswell in terms of what they do. So the vision cards, the balance, the buffs that they give each other, the framework is there. So Eliza is going to really benefit from the profile that Ice has been slowly trying to make work over time, and I think they're finally going to at least hit the mark on that. So that's the review in a nutshell. Part 3 coming within the next day or two. Hopefully we'll go over the AP problems, how you can mitigate it, some tips and tricks to managing it, some math behind what you can expect for turn rotation, and then I'll go through the espers, the weapon, the vision card synergies, and my trust on recommendations, of course. So hopefully this is insightful and informative. Thanks again for watching part 2. I hope this new structure of things ends up making these a little more digestible for both you and I and all the information that's here. But that's it for now. I'll talk to you all soon, and enjoy the rest of the week.